Imagine this. A quiet, ordinary summer afternoon. July 15th, 1976. Chowchilla, California. Small farming town.
Pretty normal day, right? Kids heading home from the pool.
Exactly. Air's warm, everything's calm. And then, out of nowhere, a whole school bus just vanishes.
Gone. With 26 children and the driver.
Yeah. So today, that's what we're diving into, this really chilling true story, the Chowchilla Kidnapping.
We've looked at, articles, interviews, some really powerful ones with survivors and old news reports too, trying to piece it all together.
Our goal here is to really walk you through it. What happened during that abduction, the terror of being trapped underground.
And that incredible escape story, how they actually got out.
Right. And then there's the motive behind it all, which is, frankly, bizarre, really surprising.
Definitely unexpected.
And maybe most importantly, the aftermath, the lasting impact this nightmare had on everyone, for decades.
It's a crime story, sure, but it feels like it's much more about survival, resilience.
And the long shadow trauma casts.
Absolutely. And it shines a light on some, unexpected things, like how the justice system ended up affecting the survivors and who these kidnappers actually were.
Okay, so let's go back to that afternoon, July 15th, 1976. It's just after 4 p.m.
School bus driver Edward Ray people called him Ed, doing his usual run.
Bringing home 26 kids ages 5 to 14 from the Chowchilla Fairgrounds pool.
And the bus is driving along this quiet road.
Then, bam! A van just blocks the path. Ed Ray has to slam on the brakes.
And 3 men jump out, armed, faces covered. They confront Ed Ray right there.
He didn't waste any time. One of the kidnappers, he gets right into the driver's seat of the bus.
Takes control and starts driving it off the main road.
While another one follows them in the van they arrived in.
So where are they heading?
They drive way off-road, deep into this dry riverbed. And there's this really thick patch of bamboo.
Tall bamboo, yeah. Apparently tall enough to completely hide a whole school bus.
Incredible. So the bus is hidden. Then comes the really terrifying part, moving the kids.
Forcing them out of the bus and into these vans.
And here's a detail that just sticks with you. They made the kids jump from the bus door straight into the van doors.
Why? To avoid leaving footprints. Shows some level of planning or maybe paranoia.
Yeah. Jennifer Brown Hyde, she was 9 then. She remembered seeing the guns, the men, and that second van waiting. A green one.
Yeah, and inside those vans, just horrible condition.
They'd actually modified them, lined the insides with wood paneling.
And painted over all the windows. Pitch black inside.
Total darkness.
Yeah.
You can just imagine the fear. Jennifer Brown Hyde said they felt like animals going to the slaughterhouse.
And they were driven like that, in the dark, for almost 12 hours.
12 agonizing hours through the night. No idea where they were going.
So after that incredibly long, dark drive, the vans finally stop, somewhere hidden.
But for the kids inside, no windows, no clue about time or direction. They had absolutely no idea.
Were they in the desert? Near the beach? Up a mountain somewhere?
Just total darkness and confusion.
And then they're led to the entry point, which sounds absolutely terrifying.
Jennifer Brown Hyde describes seeing this wooden ladder going straight down into a hole in the ground.
A deep hole.
Her first thought. She said she thought they were being sent to hell.
Just awful. And what was down there? It was an old truck trailer.
Buried. 12 feet underground.
Yeah, completely buried. A makeshift underground prison. I've heard there are some rare photos of the inside floating around.
Inside, just pitch black again. They found a table, some jugs of water, a bit of food, but cramped, dark.
And then, maybe the worst moment, once all the kids and Ed Ray were down inside.
They pulled the ladder out.
Threw down a roll of toilet paper.
And then slammed this heavy manhole cover over the opening. Told them, we'll be back for you.
Sealed in. The feeling must have been, being buried alive.
They could actually hear stuff being thrown on top of the cover from outside. Dirt, whatever.
Making sure they were trapped. 12 feet down, Michael Marshall remembered that suffocating dark and then just the sound of 26 kids starting to cry.
Oh, the emotional toll. Terrible. Silence, then waves of crying.
Michael Marshall, he specifically recalled this awful pain, thinking he couldn't say goodbye to his mom. Just wishing he could tell her goodbye.
And they were stuck down there in that dark, cramped space for nearly 16 hours.
16 hours. But, even in that situation, hope wasn't completely lost.
Right. The bus driver, Ed Ray, and Michael Marshall, he was 14, the oldest kid there, they didn't just give up.
No, they immediately started feeling around the walls, trying to find any way out, pushing up on that heavy manhole cover.
At first, nothing. It wouldn't budge. It was just too heavy.
Yeah, Ed Ray apparently suggested they should try to rest for a bit, maybe conserve energy, or just overwhelm.
Who could rest in that situation?
Exactly. So pretty soon, they were back at it, taking turns pushing on that cover with everything they had.
And Michael Marshall, being the oldest, he kind of became the focus.
The other kids started cheering him on, apparently, shouting encouragement as he pushed.
You can picture it. This teenager straining against the weight.
And then, that moment, that breakthrough, they pushed, and suddenly...
It moved. It moved.
Just a tiny shift, but it was something. The first real sign that maybe, just maybe, they could get out.
But it wasn't just the heavy cover, was it? The kidnappers had made it harder.
Oh, yeah. They'd piled heavy truck batteries on top. And lots of dirt.
And built this wooden box structure around the opening on the outside. Narrow.
So narrow, only one person, like Michael, could really stand in it to work.
So escape wasn't just lifting the lid, it was digging.
A slow, painstaking process. Took hours. Ray and Michael just kept at it, using whatever they could find down there as tools.
Michael said he dug for hours and hours before Ed Ray took over for a while, scraping away dirt, pushing batteries aside.
And finally, they emerged. Around 8 p.m. the next day, July 16th.
After nearly 16 hours buried alive. Covered in dirt, blinking in the evening light must have been surreal.
Exhausted, free, but then they hear machinery nearby.
Instant fear, right? Thinking it's the kidnappers coming back.
Absolutely. But what choice did they have? They couldn't stay there. They had to move towards the sound. Hope it meant help.
And the scene they walked into after being in total darkness underground.
Conveyor belts, excavators, men in hard hats working. Quarry workers.
Who must have been utterly stunned, seeing this group of dirty, terrified kids and their driver literally crawling out of a hole in the ground.
And Ed Ray, when he finally reached them, all he said was, "We're from Chowchilla, and we're lost."
Wow. Just simple, but says it all.
The relief back in Chowchilla must have been immense. Families going crazy with worry.
Larry Park. He was only 6. He remembers being carried off the bus straight into his mom's arms.
He said that was the moment he finally felt safe. You can only imagine those reunions.
So this whole thing, the Chowchilla Kidnapping, it went down as one of the biggest kidnap for ransom plots ever in the U.S. Just the number of victims alone.
Huge scale. But here's one of the really weird parts.
They never actually made the ransom demand, did they?
No. The plan fell apart. Apparently the phone lines to the Chowchilla police were just completely jammed.
Media calling, frantic families calling. The kidnappers couldn't get through to make their demand.
And get this, reports say they actually decided to take a nap. Figure they'd call later.
You're kidding. A nap.
That's what the sources suggest. And they woke up to the news on TV that the kids had already escaped. Plan totally foiled.
Well, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So who were these guys? Who pulls off something this elaborate yet messes up the payoff like that?
Well, they were identified pretty quickly. 3 young men, all from wealthy families in the Bay Area near San Francisco.
Wealthy families.
Yeah. Frederick Newhall Woods IV, James Schoenfeld, and his brother Richard Schoenfeld. Fred Woods and James were 24. Richard was younger, 22.
And they didn't have serious records before this?
Minor stuff, grand theft, auto charges, things like that. But they'd only gotten fines, probation, nothing remotely on this scale.
So what was the motive for this kind of crime? Kidnapping 27 people.
Okay, this is maybe the strangest part. They wanted $5 million in ransom, which back then was a huge amount. Today, that's like, what, almost $24 million?
Okay, massive amount.
Yeah.
For what?
Well, paying off some debts, funding some inventions one of them had. But the main thing, the really specific goal,
Yeah.
was to buy and restore this abandoned historic house. The Rangsdorf house, apparently the oldest house in Mountain View, they wanted to turn it into a private home.
Wait, they kidnapped a bus full of kids to fund a house restoration?
Pretty much. Sources say Woods and James Schoenfeld had already tried to get a deal to restore this house before, but it fell through because they couldn't get a $60,000 surety bond.
$60,000.
Yeah.
And they planned a $5 million kidnapping.
The disconnect is staggering, isn't it? And Woods apparently said he needed $40,000 of the ransom money immediately for that house project.
It doesn't track with the scale of the crime.
Not at all. And the evidence against them piled up quick. It was found at Woods' father's place, huge estate, 79 acres, even had its own quarry.
The quarry where they buried the trailer.
Exactly. Investigators found one of the guns used in the hijacking. And this incredibly detailed document just labeled plan.
A plan.
Yeah, outlining the whole thing, even had contingencies, like what to do if things went wrong.
Wow. And they found a draft ransom note, too.
They did. Showed They first thought about asking for $2.5 million, then upped it to $5 million.
So this was meticulously planned for months.
Oh, yeah. Turns out, security guards at that quarry had actually seen the three of them digging that big hole months earlier. They just didn't know what it was for.
So how were they caught?
Richard Schoenfeld, the younger brother, he actually turned himself in first.
Okay.
James Schoenfeld was caught down in Menlo Park, and Fred Woods, he'd fled the country, but they got him up in Vancouver, Canada.
So they got them all. What happened legally?
Well, initially they pleaded guilty to the kidnapping and robbery charges. Made sense. The evidence was overwhelming.
But they fought one charge. Right.
Yes, the bodily harm charge. That was critical. Because under the law at that time, a conviction for kidnapping with bodily harm meant a mandatory sentence.
Which was?
Life in prison with no possibility of parole.
Ever. And they were initially found guilty of that and got that sentence.
They were. But then, years down the line, this is where things took another painful turn for the survivors. An appellate court overturned the bodily harm conviction.
Overturned it? What? The kids were injured, weren't they? Cuts, bruises, terrorized.
They were, absolutely. But the court ruled that those physical injuries, the cuts and bruises, didn't meet the specific legal definition of bodily harm needed for that mandatory life without parole sentence enhancement.
So the legal standard wasn't met, despite the horror of it all.
Exactly. It's a legal distinction that probably felt meaningless to the people who lived through it.
So what did that mean for sentencing?
It meant they had to be resentenced, and the new sentence was life with the possibility of parole.
And that possibility of parole, that just hung over the survivors for years.
Decades. Imagine facing parole hearing after parole hearing for the people who buried you alive.
It forced them to relive it over and over. Many survivors talked about feeling betrayed by the system.
Constantly having to argue against their captor's freedom, it caused immense ongoing trauma.
And eventually the parole dates did come.
Yes. Richard Schoenfeld got out in 2012. James Schoenfeld followed in 2015.
And Frederick Woods, the last one.
He was paroled in 2022, nearly 46 years after the kidnapping.
46 years. The long-term effects on those kids, now adults, they must be profound.
Incredibly profound, and also really varied. Statistics mentioned in some reports suggest higher rates of things like addiction issues, divorce, even run-ins with the law among the survivors compared to the general population.
The trauma echoing through their lives.
Yeah. Michael Marshall, the kid who did so much of the digging, he battled addiction for decades. Jennifer Brown Hyde still deals with anxiety from it and found the releases really hard.
It really shows how differently people cope, doesn't it? Especially around forgiveness.
Absolutely. You have someone like Larry Park, who was 6 at the time. He became a pastor, got sober.
And he chose to forgive them.
Explicitly. He actually met with them, told them he forgave them, even apologized for hating them. He said it brought him peace.
That's remarkable strength.
It really is. But then you have Michael Marshall's perspective, which is just as valid.
What's his take?
He talks about how you can forgive, but you should never forget. He admits he still carries resentment, even while admiring Larry's ability to forgive fully.
It shows there's no single right way to heal from something like this.
Not at all. It's deeply personal, incredibly complex.
And looking back, there's this really tough perspective some survivors have shared.
That they feel like they're the ones who kept being punished.
Yeah, enduring the trauma for decades, the parole hearings. Well, the perpetrators eventually walked free. The difficult thing to process.
It really is. It highlights that complex relationship between the crime itself, how the justice system works, and the deep, personal, lifelong impact of trauma.
So, quite a journey we've traced here. From that terrifying abduction, being buried alive,
to that truly incredible escape led by Ed Ray and young Michael Marshall. Just amazing courage.
and then peeling back the layers on that motive. So bizarre, tied up with restoring an old house.
And the fact that these were young men from privileged backgrounds, it defies easy explanation.
And finally, looking at that long shadow. Decades of trauma, different paths to coping, different ideas about healing.
All contrasted against the eventual release of the kidnappers.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How does an event like this shape an entire life over 50 years?
And what does justice really mean when the consequences for victims just keep unfolding long after prison sentences are served?
What does this whole story tell us about resilience, about the sheer strength of the human spirit, but also the different ways people navigate the absolute unimaginable?
Definitely a lot to think about. A story that stays with you.